So hi ladies and gentlemen, it's the 30th of September 2018 and I guess first of all, before we talk about my flybys or anything else like that, or the patterns that we're seeing, or what's actually happening with the Dobbs timeline and how that's developing or how that's moving along, I just want to say a massive thank you for everyone who's contributed to helping me with my little GoFundMe campaign. Last look yesterday, it raised about overall it raised about 500 quid, which isn't a massive amount of money, but there wasn't that many people at all overall, and those people who did were giving quite large sums, like 50 quid and stuff like that. So really massive thank you to you. It's you know, for all those, I won't mention all names individually because I haven't got your permissions to do that, and I think you can probably see it on the GoFundMe campaign anyway. But I think it's pretty kind of transparent. I think there is total transparency there. But I've really been trying to make good use of that cash, just in doing exactly what I said I would do, which is develop this timeline and try and give you a much more updated, clearer understanding of what is actually happening and the movements of this thing. And we've learnt a lot by the last flyby on the 17th of September that's just gone. You know, I think we saw it coming into view really quite big over India around about the 5th of September, and that's where we seem to have most of the seismic activity. Quite big earthquakes, incredible storms, incredible flooding, and it's our third sighting in that fundamental position, isn't it? And we've had three really big sightings I wouldn't say really big well, we've had three really quite amazing sightings round about the August-September period, and we've had three sightings round about the December-January period. Possibly the first sighting on the 22nd of, was it 22nd or the 24th? Maybe it was the 24th. I think it was the 24th. I'll have to put the date up now. There's so many, I get so slightly confused. But Becky Lewis's shot on the I think it was on the 24th. I'll put the link up there so you can see that. But obviously the subsequent year it was on the 20. I'd said we'd fly by on the 25th of January, and it flew by on the 21st. That was 2017, the same day as Trump's inauguration, and that was that massive sighting. And then of course we go forward a year and we have, you know, the massive sightings, the Turkey report, and who was it? Who else put it up? Seven Spalding, I think he put an amazing shot of it. Now that was kind of further away from the sun than Earth at the point, so you see it kind of almost entering into the night sky in both Turkey report and, you know, Seven Spalding shot. You see it entering into the, you know, delving into the night sky, and that's rare. The only other we haven't seen it delving into the night sky. Well, we have a couple of times before. We saw it the first time, which was on the, as I seem to remember, I mean, there's ancient sightings of old, and we're going to talk a lot about that because we're going to massively transform the Dobbs timeline for you all now, and I think I'm going to give you the answers that you're all looking for. I don't know if they're the answers you're going to want to hear, but we have a situation, and well, just sticking to the nighttime sightings, you know, the first sighting ran about this like the 15th of August. It was on the 15th of August actually, 2016, that classic Matt Rogers shot. And I know I've shown many of these shots over and over again, and I know I focus very much on this kind of twin tail object, but the reason is, and as it will become clear, is I'm a great believer in the macrocosm microcosm kind of, I don't know, scenario, whatever you would call it. You know, this kind of, that if you can try and look at everything and get a picture, or you can try and focus on a very specific part of everything and get a bigger picture. And sometimes we've got to look very, very close up at a very a specific aspect and give enormous focus on that specific aspect to open up that picture. As sometimes the biggest overview just doesn't reveal, it just gives you an overview with no real kind of like, no real backbone or understanding of what's really going on. And so my staying with this twin tail, kind of like this twin tail object, whatever it is, I think is opened up a massive, it's opened the whole thing up so massively, and I'm going to try and explain that, and I'm going to give you a very, very big picture now, and it's a very complicated picture, and I've tried with what I've got down here, written down, to try and find a way of moving through that in a way that's going to be simple, relatively simple, so that hopefully you can understand it. But it's not going to be an easy presentation for me, but I think I'm going to blow your minds. I think I'm going to blow all your minds with this, and I think for a lot of you it's going to ring true, and there's been a lot of research that's gone into this, and I hope that there is going to be errors. There is going to be errors, and please don't be be as harsh as you like in your comments. I think all banter is good banter and everything else like that. As you can see, I don't delete comments. I just leave it all up there so you can get an idea of what we're all dealing with as well when we put stuff up there, and the sort of stuff that comes through. And I've noticed that a lot of my subscribers really support me there when I get really shot down or trolled, or just hate mail and that sort of stuff comes through. It's just like, I really appreciate when subs come in there and kind of like give me a bit of support, as I know all the rest of the Planet X community does, because it's a very, very difficult thing for us to all grasp. Anyway, just finishing off the nighttime shots, you know, where we'd seen it before in the nighttime. There was obviously that shot where Matt Rogers got it, like I say, on the 15th of August, and he was up in Hull. I believe he was looking up to the north. It popped above the horizon line, and then it went back down again. And this, to me, the fact he had to go so far north, and I'd been tracking his videos beforehand, and he'd been seeing this red glow, and he was convinced if he went a bit further north he might get a shot of it, and so he went up to Hull and he got the shot. And that's when we really saw Matt Rogers. Before then he was kind of more focused really on chemtrailing, wasn't he, really, in his videos, and looking what they were dumping out of these aircrafts. And he went a lot more into Planet X after capturing this magnificent shot. Now, I am kind of assuming that that's coming in from the night sky, coming in from the northern hemisphere, it's coming in from the northern hemisphere, and it's also coming in from it's coming in from above Earth, basically, as if from the perspective of a northern hemisphere and a southern hemisphere of our solar system. And it seems to be coming in from the north, but it's not actually behind us, it's coming in above us. It's just beginning to delve into our night sky, but it's tracking back down. It would actually move between us and the sun eventually. That's where it's heading, to drop down to the southern hemisphere of our solar system at that point of his shot there. Now this is relative. This is really important we get to understand this, because we've got these three shots. You know, you've got this shot on the like I say, on the 15th of August 2016. Then we've got the ESO shot again in August, and which was on August the 17th, and we had the ESO reading, you know, the European Southern Observatory, which recorded massive gravitational anomalies on the same day that this big twin-tail object was caught over from Brazil on, I believe, Portugal. So it seems like it it was kind of pretty much over the Atlantic at the time when it was seen. You know, we're piecing this together, and then obviously we've just had the September 17th shot. Now, I said it would come into view on September 17th, or around about that time. I was 10 days out really, maybe 12 days out. But nonetheless, you get the gist, because the reason I guess I was out is because that kind of point where it's coming, it's transferring down and across, is the closest aspect that it's the August position. If we can use the kind of months as astronomical positioning, you know, that we can understand. Because if we start using astronomical bearings, and we're going to get really, really confused here. So I'm going to just use the basic months as our astronomical positioning marks to make it a little bit easier to track from. So if we can assume that the cross point of where this twin-tailed object on the August September on the July August side of the solar system is the area where the twin-tailed object will cross on that side of the solar system, and then it will traverse across to the other side of the solar system, orbiting what it's orbiting, which is this red dwarf planet. And I'm assuming or guessing that January-February is the transition point on the far side of the solar system. You know, if we're saying it's a 198-day orbit, as I originally thought, two of those is 396. So it's effectively, I was assuming that we would have two of those cycles with one cycle of Earth going around the Sun. Now, because of the June sighting on June the 17th, and because of the December cycles, which I always consider to be on the far side of the orbital, or on the orbital side to the July-August period, it means we have not 2 points, two opposing points where it's being seen. We have 4, and that means that the orbital period is not actually one single orbit of this twin-tailed object going around Planet X, the dwarf star, and this dwarf planet and this blue Cucina. It's a 396-day orbit. I'll try and put diagrams over the top of that as well to try and make that a little bit clearer, because I tell you, it's a massive, massive maze of astronomical points that we are going to explore here, and as we go through it, it's going to become clearer and clearer as we get an overview here, because we're going to keep repeating these little bits as we're going through this and reinforce this. And when you start grasping the picture that I'm going to give you, you're going to start getting really, really excited, because I'm going to transform your understanding of this, and as I get closer to it, everything is going to ring true for you, and you're going to think, I'm getting this, he might be onto something here. And okay, so if we take the 17th of September and we add 99 days to that, a quarter cycle, an exact quarter cycle, it takes us to the 25th of December this year, 2018. And that's why I took this off. I keep taking these off to I'm looking through them and everything's a bit hazy at the moment. That's probably the state of my mind. Don't mind if I clean my glasses, because I'm struggling to see. And I've got a bright light over there because I haven't got much light in here. Even though it's daylight outside, I'm sort of sitting here and the light doesn't come in here so well, so I've just got a light over there. So, but that takes us to 100 days, 99 days takes us to the 25th of December 2018. And you know, as we know, yesterday, in fact, for me yesterday, because obviously I'm in a different time zone to Indonesia, but for yesterday was the time when I received, yesterday morning, well, yesterday evening actually, I actually heard yesterday evening, that's the first I'd heard of it, because I've been so busy on this timeline, I haven't checked the news, and then I heard yesterday evening that earlier in the day, possibly English morning time, that around about the time that there'd been a tsunami in Indonesia and an earthquake just before, and if you can understand what's really happening here now, we are ahead of Planet X, and we are ahead of Nibiru orbiting Planet X. We're a month ahead of it. We're both tracking in the same direction, but depending on how big the orbital diameter, the orbital circumference of this twin-tail object going around this dwarf planet, depending on how big that is, will depend on who will get to the 25th of December 1st. I'm of a mind that we will get there first. But you can imagine, as we're both coming to this point of crossing, we are in very close proximity to the tail of this thing, and we're travelling at the same speed and virtually the same direction as all the debris in the tail, and getting closer and closer and closer to it. Now yesterday marks the point where our two, with the tsunami yesterday, kind of marks the point for me where we start getting the first gravitational effects, where one body starts affecting the other. Now, if we're both the main bodies are affecting each other directly, and we see this happen, then we know that any objects in the tail of this object, in this twin tail, the trailing behind this object in this twin tail, any objects are going to be drawn to either Earth and Nibiru. And if they do come towards Earth, they're not going to have any escape velocity, barely any. They're not going to be able to form an orbit. They're just going to fall to Earth, and they're not going to be able to burn up in our atmosphere because they're not going to be travelling fast enough. And this is what we're going to have to deal with at the point when, like I say, we should stay ahead of it all the time, in theory. But like I say, that doesn't mean that debris behind its tail can't track across. It's very difficult to say. It's very, very difficult to say how this is going to pan out. But we could expect debris. Like I say, we might stay ahead of it all the way. It's very, very difficult to say. And then we come round, and then we have to go across the system again for sort of like, and we're going to have all the, we're going to be a lot closer to the debris probably after Christmas, if we manage to overtake it before it overtakes us. If it overtakes us, then we're in big trouble. We've got a lot of debris to deal with, and I don't think we're going to do that. Mathematically we should clear it. There's no guarantees. if anything's gonna track across from from Nibiru, it's more likely to do it. But it's very difficult to say. I mean, it's so difficult to say. It really is. You see, it transforms my whole model. It transforms my whole model in the same way. What you end up with is effectively the same results. And so my model has been very much not built on people like Farada's model and Sitchin's model and all these different models. I base my model just on our astronomical sightings. I'm just trying to work that out and let those sightings be the yardstick of this. You know, let those, because like I say, I just cannot get my head around noisy minds that just are throwing stuff out there without any pragmatic. And there's no offence against anyone out there. I'm talking about my process in this. So I'm like a train spotter. I focus very much on a very specific area, and other areas I kind of push out a little bit, and because they become cluttersome to a theory. It's like a Cole's razor, where we have to sometimes cut away a lot of essential data to bring some things back to a raw kind of framework, where then we can start rebuilding all that data and bringing that data to it bit by bit and slotting it all in correctly. We need the fundamental structure of this, and that's what I think I can offer you now because of the sightings that we've had. So sorry about the harping on and the waffling on, but I'm about to go take this absolutely down the rabbit hole, and it's going to blow your mind. And I want you to know, and I want to show you my workings of how I got there. And ironically, this tsunami that has just occurred yesterday or late the day before. I've been researching another tsunami that occurred on the, and it's a very specific date here, because you remember the big sighting on the 21st of January 2017, and that, like I say, the year after, as in the beginning of this year, 2018, where we saw the eclipse. We saw it eclipse, and then we saw the massive sighting. So we saw it approaching us from the sun, and then we saw, you know, the like I say, the two shots where it had obviously gone through the ecliptic. It had obviously passed the kind of like the orbital kind of track of Earth going around the sun, and it had gone behind the Earth and was entering into our night sky. At that point, it was above us. I'm of a mind, but actually behind us, further away from the sun than us, but actually above us also, still in the northern hemisphere. And it had tracked up, and that quarter of that journey from August the 17th, the big sighting on August the 17th, it had done that quarter cycle of tracking up to that point where we caught it, where these people had caught it, and that was not a half cycle point, that was a quarter cycle point. And so we can upgrade the Dobbs model on this point. And when I'd come to this realization, I'd already massively suspected this because of the sightings we'd had, like I say, on June the 17th. There was no way that we can see this on both sides of the solar system at the same time. Just like there's no way that our solar system can be a plane or a pancake or this kind of standard model where we have this flat ecliptic plane. It just does not work. It does not work. So, well, what happened was, I've been working with a friend doing some, working with a carpenter who's a friend of mine, Jono, who's a musician as well, and he's just made a brilliant album. And I thought, well, I can use that. I've asked him if I can use his music. Seamlessly put me onto this nugget of information. There was basically a tsunami in 1620. In 1606, and it occurred on the 20th of January. But it's quite interesting because in 1588 you had the Great Tempest that destroyed the Armada in one fell swoop. And in 1596 you had the first ever dwarf planet that was considered a variable star at the time. A variable star with a 400-year orbit, an estimated 400-year orbit. Is it all sounding a bit familiar? That was 1596, and then like I say, in 1606, which would have been January the 20th, 1606, we'd first seen Planet X coming in 98. We were told it was Comet Halley-Bopp, but that was the first sighting. And so they'd obviously had Comet Halley-Bopp turn up around about 1582. So we can assume that they put the calendar, they changed the calendar to make sure that though the closest proximity was going to occur in the Gregorian calendar they would have recorded it on the 30th of January. Is that right? On the 30th of January 1607 by the Gregorian calendar, which was the other calendar that was converted to in 1582, just in kind of like the really strong Catholic countries. Of course, Britain didn't do that. Britain and Americas didn't join until the sort of 1700s, but didn't leave the Julian calendar till the 1700s. But that would have meant the point of eclipse would have occurred on Christmas Day, if there was an eclipse, except I suspect there wasn't one. I suspect they got their maths wrong. I suspect the Catholics got their maths massively wrong because they didn't have the correct astronomical data, or they didn't fully comprehend what was occurring. You see, when I discovered this wasn't a tsunami that occurred around here. You know, I was living on the Somerset levels when I had my dream about Nibiru, or this twin-tail object passing Earth, and it showed me in the vision. I saw Planet X passing Earth, and it was coming from the direction of the sun, and as it approached Earth, it was casting a shadow on Earth, and so you couldn't see any sunlight from Earth, and that, you know, and as it got closer, this crest of light appeared on the left-hand side of Earth, and as it got closer, Earth just moves out the way of it, and it's completely gone, and this thing just carries on going. And it seemed like a near perpendicular transit, like at a right angle. And when I saw that, I've used that in my mind's eye for all the kind of the models that I've brought together to try and work a way. That's why I had a 200-day model, really, was to allow for that model to exist, because I didn't know how else to create that, so I had to use that, and plus all the other sightings. But now we realise that there's been this consistent, I feel like, four corners. You can see how people could consider Earth as four corners, almost, because you have this kind of like this, what is it? Well, literally, like it's literally like four corners. We see it from these places. We see it quarter cycles. It doesn't really work exactly like that, but the actual movements are such that this thing, the ecliptic plane, if you like, of the twin-tailed object sits at, if that's the ecliptic plane of our solar system, not that there really is an ecliptic plane, but if that's the ecliptic plane of, say, Earth and going around the Sun on a flat plane like that, this thing is sitting like that. And so it's kind of rotating around like that. And so we have this top point and this bottom point and this front point and this back point, these four corners. I'll try and put a kind of like an overlay of that to better describe that. This tsunami that supposedly happened, you know, this. So I was living, like I say, so there I was having this warning of this planet flying by, and so there I was having this warning of this planet flying by, living on the Somerset levels, and it turns out that when this tsunami, this apparent tsunami came in, it came up the what's the River Severn, which is the kind of estuary between the most south of England, where you have Cornwall coming up to the sort of main block of England, and you have the southern Wales meeting kind of like England and that Cornwall section, if you like. That kind of estuary, that mouth point where that runs up which is basically the River Severn, and then it splits off into the Bristol Channel. That's where the wave came in, and it obviously bunched up and it came up much higher, and it flooded much of southern Wales. It flooded much of that coastline there, of southern England there. It flooded Bristol, and it flooded inland, and the Somerset levels was already there was a lot of water already, much more water than there is now, but it came way above that. And the surrounding land, there were churches on that surrounding land, and there's still the brass plates that were nailed onto the beams that show how high the water levels came, and they're on the spires of the churches. We're talking about a massive volume of water, except that it didn't come in like a tsunami. It was a tide. It was a tide that stayed in for 10 days. The water level stayed there for 10 days. And that basically means that it wasn't a tsunami at all. It was a tide. And I'll tell you what tide it was. It was the king tide. It was the real meaning of the term king tide. And when I'd finally realised this, that I put it together, and that's big thanks to Johnny there for putting me onto this, because I suddenly put that into that made sense, and we've got brass plates, like I say, and that's still nailed to certain beams of that occurring. Very, very, I just didn't realise it was there. I'd lived in the area and I had no idea that was the level of water. The water came up so high above the present, already a floodplain. It came way above that. It came metres and metres and metres above it. It was a serious volume of water that came in. And so it's very different to a tsunami. It's a tide. Now, we have to think, what might have caused that tide? We had all the same things that were going on. We had a war. We seem to always have a war occur when this thing comes in. In that case, it was the Spanish Armada. We had, the dwarf planets. We had all the crazy sightings. We had everything that's going on then that's happening now. But we've had another anomaly that we've been able to identify, and that is that we get these reoccurring patterns. Like we did 20th of January 1606, we seem that the 21st of January 2017, the big sighting, and clearly around about that time that's just gone. We've just, you know, in 2018 we had the same thing. We had Becky Lewis's shot on December the 20, I think it's December the 24th, Christmas Eve, 2015. You know, there's this reoccurring thing, and then obviously we've got the reoccurring pattern, like I say, in August, around about August, you know, July, August, September. Although, like I say, I believe it's sitting in the July-August position. That's the point it cuts through in terms of an astronomical position. And so, can you also understand that because of these consistent sightings, it is not possible that the Planet X system has gone over the Sun in the fashion that I originally conceived in the Dobbs model. You know, the Dobbs model has been essential, like I say, for me to understand it and to be able to bring this all into a proportion where we can start understanding all of this. But seeing this thing, it's just kept virtually the same kind of ecliptic angle to Earth's ecliptic angle. So it's stayed at this constant, we've had this pattern. Picture a helicopter just coming straight down with its blades going round and round and round, and it's coming straight down without moving off or going up in any which way. This has done exactly the same thing. All of these patterns have just come down in a near straight line. So the Dobbs model, that no longer applies. You know, the old model that I'd had is incorrect. It has to be incorrect. And these kind of 4 lots of sightings aren't 2 cycles of like I say, 200 days or 198 days. It's 1 cycle of 396 days with 4 kind of cross points. And which is no doubt where we get this idea of this passage of crossing. Now clearly well, let me explain about the faux pas that the Catholics made. You see, we've had a lot more advantage to sort of jump in our astronomical understanding of this, because we've had so many corroborated sightings coming in around the globe, all feeding into the same place. We've got a lot of our ancient history we can look at, and we've got astronomical tools readily available to normal people like myself. Okay, well, I haven't got access to big telescopes and everything else like that, but when we have, you know, the SOHO, the ISS, you know, stereo Secchi A and B, we've got all these kind of like amazing kind of like satellites with all kind of different, not just light telescopes, not just kind of like, you know, infrared and sort of like and heat sensitive. We've got, you know, like in stereo Secchi B, we've got sort of like you've got high energy particle receivers that don't do lens flare. Apparently, you know, this is what we're kind of led to understanding. And then this is one of the things that Wayne Steiger talked enormously about when I first did a show with Wayne Steiger and Steve Olson. He was really big on all the stereo Secchi B shots. Remember this massive saucer shaped thing that kept being caught, and everyone said, oh, it's a lens flare, and Wayne was just like, well, I just don't know if it does lens flare. You know, these are high energy particles it's picking up. Can you get a lens flare with high energy particles? So with all we've got all this apparatus and all this equipment, all these people feeding into the same source, so we've got a bigger eye than probably even the Catholics had with all their kind of like dominions around the globe at the time. We've had this enormous kind of like, we've had more technology, and we've had a better, more sophisticated communication network that's enabled us to process this information better, and we've had a bigger eye on all of this. So if it doesn't mean that it's sort of come over the top of the sun, then it means that it's just if that's the ecliptic plane, it's just coming straight through and going out the other side, and it's going to carry on going. Now this was a model that this is a model you see on many different it's kind of one of the models that you know, I don't know who originally came up with the model. I don't know whether it was Carlos Ferrada, whether it was Sitchin, who actually came up with it. But I do know that I know, like, my model has changed. I know that all of our greats who researched this back in the day, like Carlos Ferrada, made the first prediction in 1939 of Planet X, and he said it would fly by on the 24th of January. Notice the 24th of January date again. He said it would fly by on the 24th of January 1939. And he said there will be a massive earthquake in Chile. And I suspect the reason he said that is because as this thing comes over and it pulls up the oceans in one space, and the direction that it would have been travelling, it would have pulled all of the water up in an area, and it would have been a very, very slow building up of water. But you can imagine that amount of weight on the Pacific Basin floor, and where the supposed, I mean, I don't believe in these subduction zones at all. I don't believe in anything. I don't believe in subduction, you know, and I think it's all a red herring, just to kind of throw you about a much bigger. But I'm not going to go down that corridor because it's already going to be complicated enough for this show. But nonetheless, those what we would call subduction zones along the kind of Andes, where the oceans, where the Pacific Basin comes up and it meets the Andes, those subduction zones, you can understand that, you know, the difference is, one is basalt, one of the floor is basalt, and it's a much denser type of rock, and the granite is actually a much lighter type of rock, which is the kind of like the formation of the Andes. So you've got these two different kind of like, these two different substrates hitting each other, and supposedly this subduction zone where the kind of the mantle is always going under the Andes, pushing it up, creating the mountains, blah 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 blah. I know for myself that is not true, and that's not exactly what's happened. Far from it. But nonetheless, you have got this difference in geological materials colliding at this point, and it's quite obvious that if you're going to suddenly massively exert the amount of weight sitting on the basin floor, you're going to get action reaction. Something's going to happen. And he said thousands of people would die. He was 4 days out. And when it occurred on the 20th, he was 4 days out, same day as the tsunami or the king tide occurred in 1606, and we're like, hang on, we're starting to see a pattern here. So then I started thinking, hang on, so we know that this thing's come straight through, but we know this thing is travelling so slowly that you know, Dr. Claudia Albus did a PhD, did a show, and I think I've mentioned it before, and she was talking about open and closed orbits, and I'd said, when I was discussing what she'd said in the video about open and closed orbits, about, you know, there is, when one object approaches another object in space, if it's travelling super high speed and it's just going to approach an object like a comet approaching our sun, and it's travelling so fast, it comes in, sweeps past the sun, and almost comes out the other side. That's what you call a open orbit. It's gone. It's travelling too fast, and it's got too much velocity. It's got what you call escape velocity. It can just escape. But if something can't generate enough escape velocity, it gets to a point where that angle, instead of going straight through, it will keep going straight through, and the angle, the slower it goes, the angle will drop and drop and drop, and eventually it will get to a critical point where it will become a closed orbit. And when it becomes a closed orbit, it's going to come back. And that's what they just the discovery of this was the first variable star, SETI, I think it was called. There was another name. I think it was originally called Mirror. It was, like I say, discovered in 1596. The first of probably 6,000 dwarf planets. This is going to start getting really interesting, because then I sort of thought, well, that's interesting. Because if I lay these kind of like, I can work out that from the, if we say from 1582 to 1606, we've got about 21 years. And if we go from 1998, Comet Hale-Bopp, to Christmas Day 2018, we get about the same period, about 21, 22 years. Well, it'd be 2019 really, but including the whole length, it's you know, it's 20, 21 years, whatever it is, you know, it's the same kind of benchmark sort of period. So I was thinking, wow, hang on, maybe Carlos Ferrado was right all along. Maybe the 20th of the 20th of January 1939 was the actual point it passed. But if that was the point it came in and it was crossing, remember, this is a protracted passage. We know that this passage, like I say, from 98 to now, it's been this long convoluted passage of this spiralling mass of planets that are trailing behind this red dwarf planet. So we know that in 1998 we see it, in 2004 we get the first big tsunami, that's when the red dwarf planet comes through. Then we get the next big tsunami, 2011, that's when the blue Kachina, the second biggest thing, comes through. And then we get the first sightings in about sort of like the first real sightings of this twin-tailed object in around 2010, 2011. Then they're chasing through. And then we've had all the subsequent experience, so we know that this is a conical system, and we know that we are a conical system because it's such a protracted process that we can see that we've had one conical system coming down towards us, an Earth's conical system, with all the planets chasing behind, not an ecliptic plane, but a conical system, and they've basically come, one's coming this direction, one's coming the other direction, and they've just basically moved through each other, spiraling around. And this explains why we can have these similar orbital patterns, as if it's going right round our sun, because it is going right round our sun, because both systems are coming right through each other. So then I started thinking, well, is there any, if we've got this staggered pattern from this, you know, if Carlos Ferrado was correct and it did pass through, and we see that every time this passes through we expect a war, we know that the war started in 1939 also. Isn't that a little bit of irony? That the war starts in 1939 at the beginning of the first sighting what Carlos Ferrada said was Planet X coming through. It just seemed like absolutely insane. I could never understand. I spent so long trying to work out how he managed to predict that passage. And suddenly it's all just become so clear and so obvious. So then I was thinking, well, hang on. So we go from it happened, and you have to excuse me because it's a massive thing to work through. So this data is getting a little bit. We go from January 1939. So 1939, 40, 41, 42, 43, 43, fake alien invasion. Remember Martians landing on the White House lawn? That made everyone go into this apathetic mode where they just believed the press was a total load of rubbish. They thought it was all fake news, and they stopped listening to the press, and so they could be then taken into a world war in the same year, and no one really believed what was going on because they'd been so belittled, because they'd all gone running out because they believed they were being invaded by Martians. So 39, 40, 41, 42, 43, 44, 45. 7 years. And then we've got to get to the end of the war. And the reason I bring us to the end of the war is because the end of the war is marks a very big, well, there was a series of earthquakes, but there was this earthquake, I think I put it down here somewhere. It was in Japan. It was the Makua, M-I-K-A-W-A earthquake in Japan in 1945. Of course, this was the same year that they dropped the bomb. It's just like, hang on. Because when we had the same thing, we had the 2004 passage. Well, we'd basically, from the point that this has started, we'd been invading Iraq and Afghanistan in the lead up to 2004, because we'd had obviously the 2001 Iraq invasion. Or was it Iraq? Yeah, and then it was Afghanistan, I think, in 2001, and it was Iraq in 2003. But basically, it was the whole beginning of what to me is really the Fifth Crusade. That's when the Fifth Crusade really began, and maybe you could say the Seventh Crusade actually, because you've got World War One and World War Two. So maybe you could actually say the sort of like if the Fifth Crusade was, if the Fourth Crusade was, you know, correct me if I'm wrong here, you know, please, you know what I mean. But if we're saying the Fourth Crusade was around about the 1100s, then sort of like then I guess the fifth would be the First World War, the sixth would be the Second World War, and the seventh would be, this would be the Seventh Crusade. And isn't it ironically that the 2004, when we had the first big tsunami, we have all the, that's really around about the time when this all began, where we have this big crusade start against the Middle East. And then in 2011, Fukushima. So 2004, 2000, when was it? It was the beginning of the end of 2004. It was the end of 2004. So 2005, 2006, 2007, 2008, 2009, 2010, 2011. 7 years again. And we come to the 2011 Fukushima earthquake. And what happened a week after the Fukushima earthquake? We go to war with Libya. You start to see the pattern. So we have this 80-year period. We have this 80-year period, it seems, from 1939 to 2018, 19, what is that, 1939, 40, 50, 60, 70, 80, 90, 100. Yeah, it's basically 80 years. It's this basic 80-year period that you could call this kind of period of, what do they call that period in the Bible where the tribulation period? And I'm not really full of the Bible in terms of a religious text, because I think that it's clear to me that they've taken over this whole, the Bible has been used to, not to say negatively, because I think the Roman Catholics have kind of engineered this for their own for their own ends in this, and all our calendars are ultimately built around the movement of this thing. I'm realising, because if we assume that it's an 80-year tribulation period, that there has to be perpetual war from the beginning of this. So we have if you like, the point when it jumps into it cuts the ecliptic, the whole system cuts through our ecliptic, and it's going over the top of the sun. It's an 80-year period. It's not like as I had it from 2011, it's not like a 7-year period at all. It's an 80-year period. And so that is the entire tribulation period. Which means that how long is one cycle? We can now see how long one cycle is from that. I'm so sorry it's getting complicated to get there, because there's a lot of dates to try and get your head around. But if we can see there's a cycle there, then we can actually say that if we were then to calculate from where the second crossing point is, around the 1606 or the 1588 to the 1606 passage, if that was one passage, and we know that there's 2 cross points, and there was a tribulation period around there, then we're looking for a second cross point. And I thought, well, this has got to surely corroborate. I thought, is there 80 years ahead or before, is there anything that occurs which is of a similar pattern? And sure enough, I found the Great Comet of 1660. Because if we go from the end of the 1660 up to almost 333 years, basically, which I know that sounds a little bit unbelievable. When you actually do the maths of it, you'll really start laying these out, and you'll realise that it really is. In 1 millennium, you get 3 cycles of this. Like literally. And so you start laying this on a map, and let me just take you through what that looks like if you actually realise that this is every 333 years a king tide comes in, like a king tide that's higher than any other tide going. And so we could understand how of old this would have been kind of termed as the time of the return of the king. The return of the king's tide, the settler of settlements. The one that, it's like, this is, the Kielbania Bible calls it the dragon. And it says that man isn't punished for the mistakes he makes. He's punished for the mistakes he fails to rectify. And this thing then comes and sorts out everything that we need to sort out, basically. And if we don't sort it out, then it sorts it out. So back to going back in time to this, looking right down the chain of how long this is, looking at how many times this has affected us. If we're assuming that we get 3 cycles every 1,000 years, then we have obviously the first cycle, which goes from the 20th of January 1939 and ends on the 25th of December 2018, And we all know what's happened in that cycle, don't we? Because we've had the Second World War, we've had all that we've had, and that cycle, we have this whole cycle mapped out now, the big cycle, which enables us to build a much bigger clock and a much bigger, more accurate calendar to bring back the dragon. We need to bring the dragon back into our calendar. The king tide, the return of the king. Our calendar needs to go back to the old kind of empirical way it was structured, and that's what we need to do. We need to, we need to understand what it is that's going to eclipse our sun. Many of us are going to try and tell us it's Jesus and everything else like that, but let's go back to the next sighting before that we also calculated because of the Spanish Inquisition and then the Great Comet of 1680 and this, the changing of the Gregorian, the Julian calendar to the Gregorian calendar in 1582. So we've got, the Spanish Inquisition, Shakespeare, we've got the Renaissance, we've got the Fire of London, the Age of Discovery, we've got the English Civil War, we've got Parliament, we've got the French Revolution, we've got the Comet of 1680, all in that period, in that time frame. So it kind of makes a little bit more sense. Then we go back to the 17th of February 1273 to the 7th of January 1353. And of course we've got the Battle of Lewes, and that time we've got the Battle of Lewes, Simon de Montfort. Now that doesn't sound that relevant, but that was a massive battle where basically we're led to believe it was a small skirmish and Simon de Montfort came down with a bunch of Londoners. But the thing is, he defeated Henry III, Henry III's brother, who was King of Germany, Richard, not Richard the Lionheart, Richard, he was King of Germany, richest man in all of Europe. We've got Henry III's son, Longshanks, or it would become Edward I, and then you've got also William Wallace. Not William Wallace. Who was William Wallace at war with? It was who became King of Scotland. William Wallace's time. It was I can't think of his name now. Think of his name now. I'll put his name down because his name has slipped my mind. It will come to me in a shape. But he became King of Scotland. So you basically got what would effectively 4 kings that actually descended. That supposedly Simon de Montfort comes down and he defeats these 4 kings. And then when you actually start thinking about this, I so wish I could remember the other who would become King of Scotland. I'm so sorry about that. Some of my history is absolutely terrible and things just disappear out of my head. But there's a lot of information here I'm trying to give you, and hopefully I'm going to lay this down lay this down as I go along to make it a little bit clearer for you. But you had that battle in 1264 led to democracy in the United Kingdom. And the story we've been given about this kind of like this Simon de Montfort coming and delivering us this democracy doesn't really make sense because it's a superhero story. It's a total superhero kind of like mentality where one man is so powerful and he can just come down. Of course, this was just an uprising. This was a total uprising of the people. And actually, Simon de Montfort was actually the king's brother-in-law. The king was actually married to his sister. The story doesn't really work. So, and we also know that Lewes Prison is actually built on. We don't know this, but it's one of the biggest. They found more kind of evidence of a burial ground, or a massive burial ground around about the site of the Lewes Prison when they were excavating for the foundations, and so. That really kind of gives us an indication of what's happened. They built Lewes Prison on the top of the ruins of the people that had risen up against the king. It was the first English Civil War, clearly, and they just tried to suppress the story and put it back down again. But of course, Simon de Montfort and Simon de Montfort, his father, Simon de Montfort the Elder, were the ones who. They enacted what was the end of the Fourth Crusade, because that's when the Fourth Crusade was going on. That was the time of that was the lead up. You know, you had King John, who ironically lost all his treasure on the other side of the country, on the east coast of the country, about 40 or 50 years before, and it's just assumed because of some kind of water anomaly that all his treasure sunk into the ground. But now imagine we realise it wasn't a water anomaly, it was probably a flood, like a tsunami of sorts. Could have, instead of it sinking down to the ground, isn't it more likely it was just dragged back out into sea? So we might be able to find King John's treasure now with this information, because it's making a lot more sense. So Simon de Montfort was the one who killed the 30,000 Cathars for Pope Innocent III. Hello? You know, this is all starting to piece together. This big crusade was just when this thing was coming in. And then so we've got that, we've got, you know, the Peasants' Revolt, 1381, all these kind of like, all these dates start sort of like, all these, well that's a bit late, the Peasants' Revolt, for that, 1353, it was close though, it was leading up to that, wasn't it? And then the next flyby before that was the 16th of February 940 to the 21st of January 1020. Now I don't know a lot about that period, other than it was King Canute's time. And what did he try and do? He tried to stop the tide. He tried to stop the wave. What was he talking about? King Canute. Doesn't that start fitting together with, hang on, that story's a little bit odd. Then we go back to the 1st of March 607 to the 3rd of February 687. Muhammad. That's when Muhammad turns up. I don't know a lot about that period, so I won't speak too much about that, but that seems, could that be running in lieu, that they were when he said that the king will return? Could this be what he was talking about, this great thing that came in and gave him enormous power? Then we've got the 14th of March 274 to the 16th of February 356. Of course, this was the time of the creation of the Bible itself. This is when, not the creation of the Bible, this is when the Roman Empire became the Roman Catholic Church. This was the time when George slayed the dragon. And then 61 years before that, we go back to the next, and that's the next flyby before that is 61 years before Christ's supposed birth, and goes to the 1st of March 21, which is basically the time of Christ. Which is this new timeline. Is it my timeline? Is it the Dobbs timeline? It's, you know, I've worked with so many people to get to this. You know, this is finally realising that Carlos Ferrada basically was a very, 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 very clever man. He was a very clever man. And it's with his information and all the different people that I've worked with and bringing all this information together that we've managed to piece this together. I think that's enough for today. Sorry it's been such a long video, sorry it's been such a long process. I better just leave it there and try and make some sense of this. It's going to take me ages just to try and piece this together. So thank you so much for your time and for your effort if you've managed to get through this with me. It seems that all the speakers, all the 2012ers, Gil Broussard, kind of like Steve Olsen, kind of like Zakai Sitchin, and sort of like Carlos Ferrada and Nancy Leader, all of them, you're all right, you're all correct, all your research is correct. It's just that we've been looking at a very small part of a very, very big cycle, and we're finally getting to see the big cycle now because of our our efforts, our group efforts, our working as a team and number crunching through this thing. So thank you, and thank you for the people who put the money in my account that give me a little bit of extra push and extra hope. I couldn't have done it without you. I hope this helps demonstrate the timeline that we've got, and I hope I've kind of managed to sort of like in some way achieved the results I was setting out to try and understand the full timeline here, and hopefully I've given you what you're all looking for here, even though it's been a bit long drawn out. So sorry, massive history lesson. Ciao.